Hey there, are you tired of watching the same crappy show over and over again?
What is this shit?
And you tired of the woke bullshit of today?
Douchebaggy motherfucking cocksucker shit, motherfucking prick!
And are you tired of overpriced video games that don't work day one with overpriced DLC? If this all sounds right, then the Ninj-Yang show is right for you. All you have to do is come and subscribe, and make sure to listen to the podcast. I'll desire all your needs. Ninj-Yang, no bullshit, straight up content. The content that's right for you.
What's going on, guys? This is Ninj-Yang. Welcome to my podcast. This is episode 5. I hope you're all having a great day. And today we're going to be talking about something really different. I've been putting a lot of thought into this, not knowing how to talk about this constructively, because this is something that's easy to talk about with friends, but with strangers, it's like, how do I construct myself in a manner about what I'm about to say to you guys? So I'm gonna just kind of freestyle it here and just say it the best way I know how. So I have I carry a lot of secrets, guys. I'm a very secretive man, and I tend to have a lot of things I like to talk about. I just don't talk about with people, and one of these involves my dad, and also kind of involves me in a way. And one of the things I never tell people is, like, I grew up in the military household. My dad served in the military, and after he served, he ran bases. He managed, I wouldn't say he ran them, he managed them bases, and sometimes he was transported to different states to work in different bases, depending on where they needed him. So my dad was stationed a lot. I moved a lot as a kid, and I didn't really have friends growing up because I moved quite a bit. So making new friends was always kind of tough. My dad worked on classified project. He managed the projects, and he ensured that each project was managed with the most utter care. Other than how he felt about it, I think he never really talked about it, but he definitely wrote about it in his journal that I'm going to be talking about today. So one thing I want to make clear is when I got into UFOs and classified information, I didn't really know anything about aliens and UFOs until I was maybe 13 or 14 is when I really got into it. At the time, I just thought it was all make-believe. There was no such thing as monsters and aliens, and I never really got into it. I thought it was all just make-believe, like movie stuff. And until it actually really dawned on me, until my dad actually had some visitors come over when I was living up in Taos, New Mexico. That's pretty much a nowhere land. It's a nowhere place, guys. It's a small town of a nowhere place. And my dad usually would have visitors over. It was normal. I mean, my dad would have suits over, and I guess it was some kind of orientation. He worked at bases, and he had people in the government that would come and talk to him about how things are being run. And I remember I was in middle school at this time. I was getting out of school, and I brought a friend with me, and we were gonna go hang out. I had to stop by my house to get some money saved up, and so we can go blow some money at the arcade. And I noticed there was a car in front of my dad's house, and it looked like a Chevy, I don't know, an old Chevy car, and at the time, my dad has visitors, whatever, okay. And my friend was like, is it, he was like, okay, is it sure? Yeah, it's fine. So we went in, and most of the time my dad has one visitor. He has one suit that talks to him, but this time he had two suits. and it seemed like my dad was in some trouble. But what was creepy about this visit was these two guys that were in my house with my dad. I couldn't really hear what they were saying, but their presence came off as really awkward. As you know, when we opened the door, they turned their head like secretly at me and my friend, and they just kind of stared at us while we walked in the room. And I was like really creeped out, because normally when my dad had suits over, they would be like people, and they would say hi, and they would sometimes say to me like, how you doing in school? Are you behaving? Are you doing good? And most of the time, my dad, when the government, had friends over, and I would small talk with them, just saying I'm doing a good job, whatever. This time it was, I don't know if these guys were human, but they didn't look human. They looked like something you would dig out of a grave, And I remember my friend being really creeped out, just that stare they gave. And even when they're not looking at you, it was almost like they were watching you. And my friend wanted to leave. He said, dude, I don't like being here, man. I want to get out of here. No, I don't know what your dad does, but those guys creep me out. And even I was creeped out and said, yeah, I think I want to leave too. And my dad, I remember getting a knock, and we kind of startled for a minute. It's like, okay. And my dad told me, I need you two to leave like right now. Don't come back until like 6 or 5. Okay. My dad gave me some extra money. He says, go do something, but don't come back until like 5 or 6. So it's like, okay, that's weird. My dad normally wants me home on time, but to me it seemed kind of urgent. Like my dad didn't want me being there, around these people. And yeah, after that, it was just like, okay, it was one of the most awkward times in my life where I just didn't know what to think. So for a long time, I just kind of like shrugged underneath the rug, and it's like, okay, it's just maybe business with my dad, nothing too bad. And it's not until later, when I went to summer camp, my dad had to go out of town on a business job working at another base, and he sent me to a summer camp in Taos. Really cool place, and there was this unusual thing that happened. It was the last year of summer camp, and we had these old clocks, right? These like old alarm clocks. And my roommate underneath me, who I was bunky with, was a solid guy, man. He was like, he's not someone who would be scared easily or startled easy, but it was around maybe 10 or 11. And I remember there were at these old summer camps, they had like big windows, man, really, really big windows. I mean, old school big windows, right? And he would just stand in a very certain position at like almost like an angle, staring at something. At the time, I just like, okay, maybe he's feeling homesick, or maybe it was just he was sad because it was the last day of summer camp. So I didn't bother him. I just kind of went in bed and just like, just kind of slept it off. And it was not until like 1 o'clock. It was 1 o'clock where I had to go wake up and use the restroom, and he was still standing in that same position. Again, I just kind of went to the restroom, not thinking much of it, and I came back, and I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't help like looking at my friend named Rock. And he's like, I was kind of concerned because he's like, he's been standing there since 11 or for a while, and I decided to like get down to kind of ask him like, what's up? So I would say, hey Rock, what's going on? Are you okay? And he, no response. He's standing stiff as a statue, staring at something. And I remember just kind of approaching him, trying to see what he was looking at. And from there, I remember there was this light post and this like kind of like a playground or like a place that you would play, right? And there was this figure, this unusual figure that was standing outside the pole. I didn't see its face, but there was something standing out there. And I remember just being startled as my heart was starting to beat really fast, and I started to get a bit startled and scared. And just I remember just blinking like that, just almost like a quick flash. I looked around and it was gone. And the guy out, my roommate, my bunkie, he kind of came back to, I guess, down to earth or whatever. He was like almost in a state of trance. And he looked at me and he says, Dice, I mean, like, what time is it? And I said, dude, it's like 1:30 in the morning. Like, you've been standing there since like 11 p.m. Are you okay? And yeah, he was just startled. He didn't realize. He was just like, he almost didn't know where he was, or a sense of time was lost. He had no memory of what happened or if he was even standing there. And we went to bed. I went to bed. I didn't know what to do from there, so I just kind of said, okay, well, maybe we should get to bed. It's late. I'm tired. You're tired. And I remember the next morning, we went in town last day to like spend some money, because the cool thing about summer camp, at least the summer camp, I went in, if you did chores, you got allowance. And I decided to go blow some money. And I remember coming across this unique t-shirt that had like this gray alien holding a cube or something. And it was one of the most unique t-shirts I looked. And what fascinated me about the t-shirt is like, it almost looked like something I saw outside last night. Just more exaggerated. So I actually paid the t-shirt. That was actually like 30 fucking bucks. Yeah, $30 for an extra large t-shirt that was like way big to me on that back then. And I remember showing my friend, and just his response, his instant response of fear struck in. It's undescribable. And I remember him not talking to me for the rest of the day. And that right there, is kind of where I started to really think about last night, and also kind of now my dad's visitors at my house at the time. And when my dad came to pick me up, I asked him a question that I couldn't help. I told him about what happened, and I said, I don't know how to, I don't know. I said, Dad, look, I remember there's something unusual happened at camp. And he asked me, oh? He said, what was that? And I told him, I saw something outside. I don't know if what I saw was just, I don't know what I saw. I just remember seeing something outside. And my roommate, Rock, was, acting unusual. He was standing there for an extensive time. And once whatever we saw went away, it's almost like he had no memory of what he was doing. And my dad, I remember just being very, kind of disturbed by this. And he said, look, son, one thing I want you to know is, he said, I don't want you to talk about this with anybody. In fact, it's best that we don't talk about this. And I remember that day just kind of being, a bit shook, not knowing what just happened. Whatever happened, my dad knew something. So for many years, I just kind of brushed it underneath the rug, and I started to do my own investigation on what I saw, and what I found was highly unusual. Like, there was a lot of cases of abductions and little green man, as they say, or gray man, or beings that came down and taken people away for unknown reasons. And the more I looked into this, I realized a lot of it played into government and politics and cover-ups, and almost like there was a whole new world behind this so-called alien phenomenon. Sorry guys, I can't really speak right now. But yeah, it was like a whole new world when I got into. And later, my dad, I started to slowly ask my dad about what he did. I mean, it's hard to talk about this because, how do you ask your dad what he does for a living without coming off as paranoid or crazy? My dad was a solid ace, no nonsense type of guy, right? And I remember telling him about, what I was, kind of looking up, like this UFO thing, and my dad would be slightly disturbed and annoyed, but not to a point where he's told me to stop looking up what I was looking. He said you should be doing something more productive during your time, like, I don't know, going out with friends. I don't know what you kids do today. Play video games or make garage bands. And I told him, well, we do that, Dad. This is something I caught interesting. I mean, there's a lot here to be desired. And he says, what you have there is just contracted stories of people's incidents. I mean, a lot of it is not true. I mean, it's not far off, he said, but a lot of it's kind of like far-fetched. And I would ask my dad, okay, well, what do you know about this? He said, all I know is that there's a lot more to it, and the stuff that's behind this is, it's actually quite sensitive. It's, people don't know what they have in front of them, and it's better that some people don't know. So after that, I never really talked to my dad about this again. Sometime in 2013, my dad would develop cancer, and he would pass away, and his belongings became my belongings. In fact, I have a few photos here I want to show you of my dad's private collection when he was working for the government. You can see here that these are actual UFOs from the 70s. He nicknamed them the Jetsons. This was the Jetson model, somewhere in New Mexico. I can't pronounce the city, but it's pretty much somewhere in the middle of nowhere. What he was doing out there is beyond me. I wouldn't be able to ask because my dad's now dead. But this was in his private collection along with his journal. He wrote a lot about how he felt about some of the work he was doing in these bases. Some of the technology that he wrote that was, it's considered now old to some of us, but at the time it was cutting edge, like cellular processing chips that were able to process information at a more super speed rate compared to a compact disc from the 90s. I mean, some of the stuff that my dad had worked on was cutting edge, and a lot of this stuff was military applications at the time, originally military applications, designed to make supercomputers and memory chips or for aircraft fighters and stuff like that. But the one thing that interested me it was my dad's work in 2 states, New Mexico and Las Vegas, Nevada. He talked about some of the things that he was part of, some of the things that were being done there, and a lot of it seemed like my dad didn't enjoy some of the things that were going on. Like, a lot of it was integrity issues, the way workers were being treated. Workers were treated like shit, like prisoners. Even though they've been working there for a good amount of years, they were never treated like human beings. He talked about some of the integrity of technology being used as, in other words, recognition systems that's designed to recognize a person's face and categorize it in a memory system, in order to keep someone on file. In other words, it's used for unethical issues, to watch you, in other words. That really worried my dad a lot about the integrity use of technology. In other words, he described some of this technology as more tyrannical, almost like the technology had a will of its own, and a lot of the people who were developing this stuff or coming up with this stuff didn't really care about the human element of it. It was more about what we can do with it and what we can get away with. The other words, personal matters were completely eliminated. Another thing that disturbed my dad is the hybrid crafts he talked about. He talked about some of the hybrid crafts, how he called it scary technology, how each of these pieces of technology that were given to us, as I said, given to us, not retrieved, given to us, and how this technology can be harnessed in destructive manners, meaning that lasers and typical modern day weapons would be obsolete. Particle cannons and radiation rays would practically replace a lot of these old tech we have. We're not quite there yet, and I think a lot of the reasons why is because we just have, from my dad's understanding with this this technology, we haven't quite harnessed or mastered the craft of the more smaller, compact package. In other words, a lot of this stuff is big weapons, really mass. It would require tons of power to use one. So we haven't quite made a piece of technology to compact it in such a way with the technology we have now. He also mentioned a lot about genetics alterations that I think was one of the things he found more disturbing. He talked about some of the cloning issues that he described as inhumane or either highly questionable. He described some of the the DNA alterations as monstrosities and unethical practices. He never said anything because he was managing a lot of these bases, but he said in his journal he felt that genetics altering the nature of animals and humans was a unethical practice, and cloning a person would almost like result in the way of replacing people. That really it did scare him, because practically in some of these bases we already have the technology to clone people, and you can actually you can program a person to think a certain way and remove the complete human element. You would have practically, in a way, you would have a biological drone, a human being with no conscience, just in other words, just an empty shell. The only problem with this cloning process is that these beings didn't have a long lifespan. Their lifespan lasted about maybe 2 or 3 years until they actually deteriorated. So, a lot of these cloning processes, I think, are still being practiced today. And even Nightmare Hall, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Nightmare Hall. The cloning alterations, in other words, Project Chimera. One of the things my dad mentioned was some of the things that you would see. The cloning process between man and animal was something of nightmares, something of things that would scare even the most solid man. And he mentioned how some of the things that still haunt him today in his journal. He talked about some of the noises that you would hear of these hybrids. It would be something of unnatural, something of that should be terminated and completely destroyed. But a lot of these cloning processes are still being practiced today, as you mentioned, in different countries. No longer in the U.S., because the U.S. has made it clear that these practices are unethical, but it doesn't mean that they're happening somewhere else. And also, finally, the meats and potatoes. My dad talked about some of the more alien Promethean technology, time devices or time looking devices. As he said, they've been called by many names, but he calls them the time looking devices, as you can see through time, you can see through possibilities, and also alter certain possibilities through these devices. He also talked about some of the beings that were at some of these bases. He talked about some of the things that these facilities did. Sorry guys, I'm trying to read this the best way from my dad's journal's perspective. It's kind of hard to read and also record at the same time. But my dad mentioned about how these beings were actually not aliens, they're actually us from a different time. They're us from an alternate time or a further time. It's undisputed if these beings are actually us, or they're actually us from a far distant time we have not reached, or if they're us from another time of a disaster. It's unclear because a lot of these beings haven't really said, and their form of language or their form of thinking is hard to have. Modern day humans and EBEs are actually really hard to like find a really transparent answer, and a lot of it comes down to the reason because each of these beings come from a different time. So each of these beings who come from a different time have a different story. So it's really uncertain if these beings are us, or if they're us from a certain future or a certain alteration of time. He said how the most disturbing thing out of working with these beings is not just about how advanced they are, but how quaint they are of willing to help us, and at the same time, just the history behind them, the possibilities if we are going down this route too. Are they setting us up for a possible future that we do not know about? It's unclear. My dad was very, very superstitious of some of these beings that he worked with. He said he describes them as a willingful, untrustworthy worker, as my dad would pretty much defy them, as that they were willing to work and help, but they were completely untrustworthy due to their willingness to say, and even if their willingness to explain certain things, he described them as unclear, as each beings from different time have a different story or a different history behind it. So it's almost like these beings are either lying, or either we're talking to a different being all entirely from a different dimension. It's really hard to get clear on this without kind of losing yourself into it. And there's more in this stuff in my dad's journal. A lot of it is long lengths, and it'd probably be hard for me to explain it to you guys. But I'm actually planning on publishing this. I think I've actually tried to. The problem is that book companies want to make alterations because they find that some of the stuff they find here is disturbing, and I don't want to like alter my dad's journal. But it's interesting when I look back at this because people talk about aliens as, I don't know, it seems so easy to talk about to our mainstream. Now, someone actually asked me, a good friend of mine asked me, why aren't there any more like UFO abductions anymore? In fact, I actually have something here about my dad's journal on why we don't see many of that anymore. And a lot of it comes down to the treaty that was signed back in the 70s, and that treaty actually expired back in 2005. Okay, why? I think my dad describes this as basically a time rift between their world and ours. So apparently these beings couldn't stay here for a long period of time. Time would not allow it, and there would be massive consequences of two beings existing at the same time for too long. Now, there's a possibility, I think, that we will see these beings again, but not until a certain amount of time. As my dad says, there's a time and place for visits, due to the understanding, not just the cosmos, but the nature of the universe, as we've gained throughout the many years of understanding the universe through technology and having a better understanding of time, of what time really is. So with my extensive knowledge of my dad has a lot of interesting stuff here. One here mentions he talks about time rifts. In other words, time rifts in his definition is two worlds kind of colliding for a period of time, and then at a certain time they disappear. I'm not the best person to explain this, so practically he mentions Mars. He said if you actually look back in the 90s or even late 70s, you can find pictures of possible buildings down there. Now if you look back now, you won't find them anymore. They're gone. So there's a possibility during this time there was a civilization existing around the same time as we are living today, just from hidden eyes where we can't see it through more like a dimensional curtain. He said that in Mars it looks like a barren wasteland, but if you open the curtains through time, it's a striving civilization. And he talks about Star City, how Star City is a thriving civilization that's way ahead of its time. In fact, if you look at Earth time and our time now, it would be Earth time and their time and their dimension. So it's really kind of interesting, and also kind of hard to see it from 2 points of perspectives. So if we looked at Star City in 2022, there will be nothing there, but in the year 2022 now, and from a different dimension, from a different outlook on how the universe works, there would be a civilization there now. So there is actually, by default, you can say there's probably a civilization thriving there in another time. He talked about consequences on looking glasses devices, time devices, and how this technology is a violation against nature itself, and how there's consequences of the long-term use. He says that time gates are a consequence to natural disasters. My dad mentions how the power device is an unusual power device. It's not man-made. It's actually harnessed through a certain magnetic field in the universe. In other words, there are certain places in the world that have a strong magnetic force that's powered naturally by nature itself, some form of cosmic energy I can't even describe. But he said there's time gates that our government knows about, and they utilize these time gates to see through time. Now the consequences of looking through time is to provoke catastrophes. In other words, in order to power a time gate, you're utilizing a form of gravity, and that's pretty much our planet Earth. So when you look back at time, the way my dad describes looking back in time with these devices, it's almost like we're slowly rewinding time back. It's an unusual way. In other words, people won't be able to know if time is being going back forward, but the gravity tends to have a negative reaction to this device. In other words, natural disasters tend to happen. Things of our Earth tends to change. So there are negative consequences with this, and also cosmo problems. In fact, he has something here. He talks about human history, classified, how he was debriefed on an early human history of time devices, how there's a possibility that these devices that we've recovered and reverse engineered are devices that cause the reset of human civilization. He said, I quote, looking back at some of these historical events, the Kuiper Belt, that's known as an asteroid field, could have been once a planet itself. Long ago, humankind has thrived for millions, or much more longer than a million years. He looks back, he says something about how time devices were made in certain parts of civilization to see through time. Over time, these devices have caused a negative outlook on a negative reaction to the universe itself, causing natural catastrophes, asteroids, or planetary destructions, as some would call. Anyone who knows ancient Sumerian would know, that the Kuiper Belt. There's a theory out there that the Kuiper Belt was once a planet and eventually shattered through some natural disaster. Now he says in this forbidden history that's you won't find in modern day society, but it's been given down to people before him who've been in charge and maintaining civilization, maintaining bases. He says that our history is actually intertwined with them, and that means them, aliens, creations, and the origin of humankind. He says the origin of humankind is no different than messing with genetics. In other words, he talked about, as I said before, he talked about how genetics, how we're actually playing with altering human genetics, and also playing with cloning, actually plays a big part in human history. How we are a byproduct of the same things we're right now doing now. I don't want to go even further than that. My dad talks about some of the advanced weapons. He said we have weapons now that are able to pierce even a medium-sized star. He says, he says these weapons are not yet being used under military applications, and I think a lot of that comes down to just the mass of making a weapon like that, and also just the technology is not quite there to apply it to anything modern now. But it doesn't mean that we're not going to apply it anytime soon. And there's more to it, but that's all I have to say right now, guys. Like I said, UFOs and talking about this stuff has been a big part of my life, but it's also been something I've been pretty conscious of talking about due to the nature of it. Normally I talk about this with friends. My friends know, kind of my past and my family history. But UFOs, man, they're like, why don't we see UFOs anymore? And I think a lot of it comes down to just what my dad said, the treaty system. And also just, right now, what we're doing now with the technology that's been given us, we're actually playing, pretend right now with a lot of this tech we have. We're trying to, apply it to modern day use. And it seems like right now that we haven't quite, we kind of hit a dead end of what we can do right now. And I think it's because right now our technology does not apply well to the advanced technology that was given to us then. Other than that, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know I freestyled this, winged this a bit, but that's the best way I can talk about this video, is just winging it and explaining it the best way I can. If you guys like this video, dude, make sure to sub, man. And hey, comment below. Let's have a conversation. I'll do a part 2. We'll have a conversation about this if you guys have any questions. Other than that, guys, you take care.